How should crypto be used?
I mean, I would just say it simply should be used as money. Go ahead and send and receive it, pay back debts, pay people with it. Everybody at Edge, and when we had founded the company in 2014, no one's ever gotten a fiat paycheck.
This is Roger Ver.
This is Sebo, the PCH Wolf.
This is John McAfee.
This is Vin Armani of Cointext.
And you are listening to
Humans of Bitcoin podcast.
Part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network.
Hello. This is Matt Aaron, host of Humans of Bitcoin. Remember, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is banking the unbanked, yet it is also equally unbanking the banked, meaning eventually letting people hold their own funds, not having to use bank accounts. So if you're going to be your own bank and not use a traditional bank in today's understanding of what banks are, well, you have to be able to hold that money. And Paul Puey is going to make you think differently about Bitcoin wallets. I learned so much, and my perspective on the best way to hold crypto changed listening to this episode. We had Stephen Perry last week of BitPay, and Paul Puey of Edge Wallet is another brilliant thinker, veteran in the space, humble, ready to teach if you're willing to listen. I suggest you do. Enjoy the show. Paul Puey, welcome to Humans of Bitcoin.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Paul, starting out, before we get into the Edge wallet, how you found crypto, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, your hobbies, etc.
All pretty varied. So I was born in the Philippines, but raised most of my entire life in California. So grew up mostly in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, that area. Went to school in Berkeley. I have an hardware software engineering degree. Worked for NVIDIA for almost a decade, doing kind of 3D graphics engineering, mostly software, but with a really awesome hardware team. And then actually left technology for almost a decade and operated small businesses and whatnot. And I think that was actually one of the, while it seemed like a curse at the time to have left technology, but seeing tech from another viewpoint, I think brought a huge and tremendous value to where I am today, understanding that there are people that are not technologists touching, the applications that you build. And so I think I'm one of the few people that has gone full circle. And so while I still rely on, like a UX designer, UI designer, I can have a much more intimate, quick understanding of the effect of what engineering does to the end user. From the protocol level, we bubble up our decisions, and those decisions affect an end user in ways that you wouldn't foresee. That I feel fortunate to be able to kind of piece that puzzle together more than I think the average technologist because of the broader experience that I've had. But that's kind of me in a nutshell, relevant to the crypto world. I entered the crypto world in about 2013, discovering Bitcoin, became instantly fascinated by it because of the technology, as well as from the disruptive nature of what it can do, especially having seen a lot of the fairly corrupt large establishment, having touched that working in small business, and as well as the opportunity there from a user experience point of view. Like, crypto has a significant user experience problem, and I saw ways to solve that. And so, what I'm doing now with Edge is a culmination of kind of my entire life all come together in like a little perfect storm of something I really, really want to do and I'm passionate about building. And so that's kind of the big summary right there of me and where I've come from.
That's really exciting. And we're going to dig into multiple things you mentioned there. And the famous quote, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And you mentioned the non-technical small businesses. Tell us a little bit about that. What was the first business that you started and operated?
Oh, shoot. If I wanted to go way back, first business I ever started was a service for my dad and his coworkers who were real estate agents. And they would send out mail outs. Everyone's probably received these things, right? Little cards in the mail, little magnets, stickers.
For sure.
And so they had to mail these out to hundreds of people with different addresses. They had what's called a farm. And I wrote a database on a computer to hold all of those addresses and print them off the labels. And me and a few friends in junior high would stick these labels onto thousands of these envelopes, and off they went to the mail. that was effectively like my first startup. It was, service oriented, although I did write a database in order to be able to do that because one didn't exist at the time. But that was my first foray into entrepreneurship, I guess you can call it, well before college.
Sorry to interrupt you, but now you're working with distributed databases and blockchains, right?
Now we're going to very distributed databases, although I like to not think of blockchains as databases. I'm not I don't subscribe to that nomenclature of like, oh, it's just a database. I'm like, no.
Sure.
It's definitely far more than one, but it's a really bad one in many ways. But yeah, so I'm still in the technology space. I am one of the developers at Edge, in addition to being, CEO, kind of a technical CEO. But the tech, it does definitely fascinate me. But beyond anything, definitely being a part of what is kind of a disruptive revolution, being a part of the history books that I know my kids and their kids in the future will be reading about this time that we're living in today. And so I want to make my mark.
That's really exciting. And so that was when you were in middle school and high school, but you also, later on in your life, you took that break and ran in additional, we'll say non-technical small businesses.
Small businesses. Yeah.
And what type of stuff were you doing there?
Yeah, everything from running a restaurant, bar, nightclub to operating a climbing gym. And I even did some outdoor guiding. Those are the main things that I did in kind of my hiatus from technology. Although even during then, I was always the technical guy at those companies and businesses. So I started dealing with payment systems, PCI compliance, accounting, bookkeeping, and all the software and service companies associated with all of that. Being the technical guy, you tend to be the numbers guy. Money tends to be numbers oriented. So I ended up dealing a lot with money and payments and saw a lot of the challenges. At the climbing gym I worked at, there's one piece of software that has a monopoly on all of the climbing gyms. Like almost everyone uses it, but it's built by one engineer. And he's clearly an engineer. Like he lacked almost any concept of usability, and people just dealt with it because there was no other option. But being able to hop outside, I could see, I see why he made those choices, because those are very engineer choices. But we're sitting on the other side of this, payment system, membership system, check-in system for members, and realizing wow, there's definitely a disconnect there. And few people are able to kind of experience both sides. Our team working at the gym didn't know what it took for him to implement some of this code and what kind of trade-offs he made. And so that was one of the more long-standing kind of jobs that I was at. And actually that was the last one I was at before going into crypto was this climbing gym. And so it was one that I loved, I would stay at forever. But this was what I call such a big distraction and passion, the crypto world, that I had to leave and do something about it. And so here we are today with, Edge, formerly Urbits.
Okay, very interesting. And so, Bitcoin was kind of the perfect combination of a lot of your skills. Maybe not rock climbing for now. You never know how it's going to develop.
Yeah.
But what are some things, that running Edge that are also similar with running a nightclub?
Gosh, so one of the things that I learned less about, well, in a way, it correlates. So one thing I noticed about running a restaurant, bar, nightclub, and this starts to drive into the kind of the merchant adoption question. So this is one thing I learned, is that you can't just train people. There's nothing you could train someone to do and then at the end of training be done and expect them to just know it. This is true of humanity. They need to actually do it. You could train them a little bit, but then they have to do it. You could train them a little more, then they have to do it. So when we thought about what crypto was doing, is they kept talking about education. Oh, we need to educate and educate. And we're like, yeah, that only goes so far. At some point, they have to do it. They have to use it, because you can only educate so much. And if all you do is educate, if it's out of sight, out of mind, then it's gone. And so one of the fundamental tenets that we've always had is get crypto kind of used, and so we build an app that's designed not as necessarily your holding app, but one that you actually want to use. So we early on, with our previous app, Airbit, started incorporating ways to use cryptocurrency inside of the app, to be able to buy things, get discounts, gift cards, and whatnot. And so we felt that one of the biggest security issues with crypto is actually solved by people using it. And so when we look at how people lose crypto, it's mostly because they just don't use it and they forget where it is. They lose the keys. In the same sense that you will lose a password, you'll forget someone's name, you'll forget someone's phone number if you don't actually call them. Right? You don't see them. And so it's this same concept of out of sight, out of mind.
Sure.
But if you're using something on a regular basis, it stays in your memory retention. That's just how humans work. And so trying to solve that problem helps solve what people consider to be the biggest problem of crypto, right? It's the key management and loss of it. And so we wanted tools like Edge and Airbits to be used frequently, both for crypto and in the future we want it to be used for other things outside of crypto, just securing sensitive data. But that was an insight that I got working in small business. It's like, oh my God, we train people how to make certain drinks. We train people how to accept some discount offer. We train people on 100 things. But if they didn't see it on almost at least like every other day, they completely forgot how to do it. And we see that in merchants that accept Bitcoin, but they don't get it very often. And so they just simply forget. It's not that pulling out a phone and showing a QR code is any harder than pulling out your credit card system and having someone swipe. It's just that it's different. And by virtue of being different, if you don't get that repetition, you're just guaranteed to forget. And I'm sure this happened early on when credit cards were trying to get adopted. People were just used to cash. And they're like, oh, how do I do this credit card thing? Where's that big clunky thing that I like swipe back and forth? I lost it. It's somewhere here, right? And the same thing is happening with crypto. So that was what I'd call like a nugget of insight that I got working outside of the tech space that effectively we apply inside our tech.
I love those simple to understand but very profound realizations, and you see this in everything. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like muscle memory. Like I just recently drove a stick shift car, and it had been years, man. And I had forgot that you need the clutch to turn on the car. And just like, obviously, if I had just read a book about driving stick shift and I'd never actually done it.
Exactly.
And same thing, like making a certain cocktail, you got to make it 100 times and then you got it. So that's quite interesting. So designing the Edge wallet, design with the user in mind and start spending it, because the more times you use it and actually buy something with it, the less likely you are to forget your password, because we've all signed up for some website, in 2006, and then we forget about it. Oh, I think I have an account here. You may not even remember what your email is, because you might have 3 emails.
Exactly. And so out of sight, out of mind. That is probably the single phrase that I think people need to consider when they're developing products, especially in crypto. You realize that humans are imperfect because of the whole out of sight, out of mind. And I've slowly been, well, probably less than slowly, but really advocating for solutions that try to not do out of sight, out of mind. And ironically, the biggest, most recommended solution for crypto holding are solutions that put things out of sight, out of mind, such as any wallet, hardware or software that says, take 24 words, write them down and put them out of sight. And almost certainly it's out of might. And so how do you expect people as humans to remember where that is when they're not supposed to see it? They never see it on a regular basis. They might even use your wallet every single day, right? But they know they don't ever touch that backup, because that thing is an emergency thing. You only do that when things fall apart. That's the only time you use the backup, is when things fall apart. And so hence why it lends itself so much to people losing crypto. So this is where I think different solutions need to be built. We're open to hearing other ideas. We've built something that helps to address that problem. And it is from the inside of just, being a part of humanity and seeing how people generally operate.
That's really fascinating. And related to what you just said, Paul, on the AMA on Bitcoin.com in 2015, which is like, that's like 30 years ago in the Bitcoin world.
Feels like it. Yeah.
Here's a quote. You said, let's just say I've carried easily 20% of my net worth in Airbits, now Edge. I think a dollar value is less important to consider than the relative value it represents for an individual. But more on that first part, this is, I'd say in general, I usually hear from experts that, don't hold a lot of crypto on your phone. A lot of people that are in that have heard that don't, store your Bitcoin phone. You need to store it in cold storage out of sight.
Right.
Is the Edge wallet safe enough to, let's say, hold large amounts of money? And that can be different for different people. But whatever that is for you or whoever's listening, it's safe enough to hold a lot of crypto?
Like I said, I don't know what a lot of crypto means. It sure means different things to different people.
Sure.
So like I said, about 20% of my net worth, I feel comfortable putting in Airbits Edge. Today, yes.
Yeah.
Net worth in crypto. However, everything else, I would not feel comfortable putting on 24 words somewhere in my house. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. And so the reason why I wouldn't feel comfortable just putting them on 24 words as a backup to like a hardware wallet is that I will hardly ever touch it. And when I do need to touch it, I don't know where it is. I've already lost crypto from a 24-word backup that I cannot find. It's already happened to me. I can't count how many people have said the exact same story. So that's not an insignificant amount that I've lost. It's what many people would die to have. But it's, luckily I have other crypto that I haven't lost. So it was a learning lesson for me that the biggest risk is not my phone getting hacked. And actually, if you look at the reports, how many reports have you actually seen of people getting a wallet like Airbit's actually hacked on their phone and losing money? Versus how many reports do you hear of people losing keys? Or worse yet, fearing losing keys and leaving their money on an exchange because they're like, I don't want to deal with the keys. Like, it's too scary for me. I'll just trust someone else and I'll just leave the money on the exchange. So you're really caught between a rock and a hard place in those two decisions. And until something like Edger hasn't been a middle ground, so we've fundamentally trying to find that middle ground where you apply as hardened security as you can to a forgiving software wallet that does automatic backup for you in case you lose your phone, gives you password recovery options, yet still hardens you against most of the common attack. And so if I had to ask, like, okay, what is the kind of the threat model? It would be, while nothing is impossible, it's not impossible for someone to hack even literally cold storage on a hardware wallet. There's ways to get to that. It's really what's the effort versus the reward, right? And so people holding their money themselves on their device versus in an exchange. I think Andreas put it really, really well. So right now the threat is that because stuff is complicated, people just hold it on an exchange. But if you look at what an individual could do to hold money on their own devices, computer or phone, and the level of security that they can apply to that, if you put it on an exchange, and say there's 1,000 people, 10,000, realistically 100,000 customers on an exchange, they, as an exchange or a hosted wallet, now have to have 100,000 times better security than me as an individual.
Because the pot for hacking it is...
The pot's that much bigger.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And while they probably do have better security than me, do they have 100,000 times better security?
Okay.
Almost certainly not. You can't scale that security that big. You're maybe twice as good, maybe 3 times as good as me because you have an IT department that's trained and you have security audits, blah, blah, blah. But you can't be 100 times better or 1,000,000 times better in the case of some services that have 1,000,000 users. It's hard for you to be 1,000,000 times better. And the bigger you get, the harder it becomes because the more people you have to hire and trust inside the company to not compromise those services. So
you're at a bigger risk for social engineering when you have a bigger company like
social engineering, or just inside job. So all of those risks increase. And that is kind of the fundamental challenge. And we're trying to solve that problem, like try to get people to feel comfortable with tools that feel familiar for them to hold it themselves versus saying, oh, this is complicated. I don't understand how to do this 12 words. I don't trust myself. I'll just stick it with a trusted third party, which effectively defeats the entire purpose of crypto.
That's so interesting. I knew going into this interview that you'd have a different perspective than other people I've spoken to about wallets and storage, because you know that your answer is not the same as most people. And that's very interesting. And I appreciate you kind of sharing that perspective when you say like how crypto should be used. I'm just, in your own words, how should crypto be used?
I mean, I would just say it simply should be used as money. Go ahead and send and receive it, pay back debts, pay people with it. Everybody at Edge, and when we had founded the company in 2014, no one's ever gotten a fiat paycheck. No one's even gotten cash. It's always been in crypto. And so that's really it. And I think people talk about crypto and scaling and the issues. It can't replace Visa, MasterCard, blah, blah, blah. Now, sure, maybe some cryptos will have those issues, but the aggregate of crypto in general has enough transaction volume over even like, say, the top 5 cryptocurrencies. We easily have enough transaction volume to replace at least one major fiat. I call it like poor man's sharding, but we have enough capacity to replace a good amount of fiat.
Sorry, Paul, I just want to drill in. This is another thing that I haven't heard before. That's quite interesting. So, if I go to a happy hour or a cafe and someone's like, wait, you work at Bitcoin.com. What's Bitcoin? But you're not as fast as, Bitcoin Cash. Right now, you can't do as many transactions as Visa and MasterCard. But saying, well, what about the aggregate of if 4 or 5 cryptocurrencies are successful? I think that's also a pretty powerful idea. And of course, that's right now. I mean, maybe multiple cryptocurrencies will become all faster than Visa and MasterCard with time. And so when someone, I think you've seen this a little bit, some people will say, particularly on BTC, on Bitcoin, although I'm sure other cryptocurrencies as well, they talk about the creating sound money. They say, no, but we need to go through the store of value phase first. How do you feel about store of value as a concept?
So it's an important concept. I think it is important. And I think that's one of the big compelling reasons people got into crypto in the first place is because, it inherently has traits that make it a better store of value than other money. So it makes it a store of value opposed to the dollar because obviously its inflationary trend is more predictable. That's one of its biggest reasons for it being a store of value, as well as being fungible, but in many ways, as well as it being usable. So the store of value is not a single term, like it's competing with a transfer of value type of, property of money. Everything kind of contributes to something being a better store of value. So yes, gold is a good store of value, but for a lot of people, it's not. Like, I don't find it's a good store of value because I can't tell that I have real gold. And plus it's also inconvenient. It's inconvenient to store it. I have to have a safe. So there's many aspects of what contribute to the store of value and what detract from it. And usability, liquidity, fungibility, all of those contribute to it, as well as the inflationary supply. And I think people look too much at like, okay, what exactly is this inflationary supply? Is it predictable and can it ever be changed? Mutability. They look to like a single thing as being this is what makes it a great store of value and don't realize that it's kind of the aggregate of all of it. I mean, let's face it, if Bitcoin came out like day one, and we're like, okay, this is the inflation rate, but it was slow and expensive to transfer from day one. Would people consider it a store of value? Right off the bat. Like, hey, it costs $10 to transfer, but man, like this is all it's ever going to exist. Only 21 million, So would it achieve the same level of adoption it has today? I would argue not. It might still be adopted if there are no other competing currencies, but I would argue that no, it is one of the detractors if something isn't as usable, and it's harder to move because the only value of a store of value is once you can get rid of it, right? If you can't get rid of it for something else, whether it be eggs, chickens, fiat, gold,
right,
then you're storing something of little worth. And so the friction or non-friction involved in getting rid of it is important in its own value, right? And its ability to store value is also the ability to liquidate that value. Its fluidity is a key piece of that. So that to me is my take on the whole term of store of values. It's an aggregate of many different aspects of a money. It's not just the one thing, sound money. And that's not even well defined. Well, what the hell is sound money? Like, you might define it one way versus me. And I think a lot of people will say that it's secure money. Okay, it usually can't be inflated. That tends to be the thing people latch onto.
Sure.
But from the viewpoint of other cryptos that they claim are not sound money, so the argument against like Cash or Ethereum, well, how hard is it to inflate those currencies versus a Bitcoin? Maybe it's easier, but is it at least cross the threshold of being good enough security and good enough hardened network rules that we know there will be a fixed amount of coins over the next 200 years? And maybe we're good enough there, and let's trade off the inflationary like super hardness for usability and get overall better store of value.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder. Sometimes we'll have phrases that sound really good or interesting, and we just assume that, religion's a great one, right? There's many different types of definitions of religion depending where you are, spirituality, related to that. So when I talk about store of value and what is money, one thing I think about is, it's got to be way better to make people want to switch. And one thing that I heard this from someone else, maybe I read it a couple weeks ago, but money should hold value, or it's just not as good. If it holds value to me, it's better. I'll just leave it like that. If it holds better, meaning that money that I can keep here with me and 5 years later will have around the same level of value as opposed to losing a lot of value. The one that keeps its value to me is better money. And one of the best examples is, I think that we all have these anxieties, whether we're, I think you find more in the working and lower classes, they keep most of their savings in cash because there's, ease or there's cost, it takes time. But for middle and upper classes as well, there's this huge anxiety of like, I have this money, I have the US dollar, and I know it's going to steadily lose value over time. Maybe not a lot of value, not like, like the Venezuelan Bolivar, right? Which is a big example that everyone talks about, but is going to lose money. Like, if my net worth was $100,000, I wouldn't keep it all in cash for 10 years. It would be 2028, it would be worth less. And that's just an anxiety that, so now I have to like talk to a financial advisor. It's like, well, you need to get these mutual funds, these bonds, which I don't really understand. I feel like getting rid of that anxiety, at least a little bit, maybe you shouldn't keep all of it there, but being able to not have to worry about, I worked so hard to make this money. Now I have to do something. I can't just hold this money. I have to do something with it now. And I think removing that anxiety is a pretty attractive way to help sell or introduce people to crypto.
Yeah. And I think one thing people forget is they always kind of ask about the stability question, like, oh, okay, well, I want it to be kind of stable. I want it to be kind of more predictable, and crypto isn't. And so that detracts from its ability to be a store of value. And that's one of the things. But, depending on where you are and what you deem as a store of value, are you looking at long-term, 5-year, 10-year store of value? Are you looking at like 5-month, 10-month store of value? And there'll be different solutions for that. Right? Crypto might not be your 5-10 month store of value type of a solution. And so, to kind of each his own, there's different tools for different purposes. Fiat still serves a purpose in that regard. And we'll probably be stuck in that kind of need for quite some time to have something that is stable relative to not the dollar, but what we can buy, right? Our goods and necessities. Like I like to quote, I love eggs. I eat a lot of eggs. And so I like to quote, well, what is my current price in Bitcoin relative to eggs? Because I don't care what the fucking dollar does, right? I can go up and down, at the point when Bitcoin's worth $1 million, $1 million probably won't be worth much, so.
Ooh, that's a really interesting quote there too.
Yeah. But so that's when I'm like, okay, well, how many eggs can I buy? That to me is the important thing. Is that going up? It's actually possible at the time when Bitcoin starts to really get mass adoption, every dollar increase in the price of Bitcoin equates to 0 additional goods that you can buy per Bitcoin. It might, because the dollar's plummeting in value and Bitcoin's just kind of staying the same. I can buy, 100 dozen eggs or whatever, and it just stays flat. And at that point, you're getting into Bitcoin not as an investment but for insurance, so you don't get screwed over versus an opportunity. And that's when we've made it. That to me is the culmination of when we've made it. And people are not like, oh, it's like a money grab, like, investment, be rich. It's like, oh, I better get into this now before I get screwed.
That's interesting. Okay. And so let's mention this in the beginning about history books. And I tell people like, hey, you're looking for Bitcoin.com. I'm like, yeah, like, who's your boss? This guy named Roger Ver. I mean, he's really into Bitcoin. He was nicknamed Bitcoin Jesus. And I really think that he'll be in history books one day. And you mentioned that, like history books, okay, let's just say someone comes up to you later today, you meet someone on the street or at a cafe and they say, Paul, what's the future of Bitcoin? Why is it going to be in history books, let's say in 2030? The year, not so important, just giving you like a year.
Yeah, I think because a lot of the things that history books cover, they don't really cover the steady state of history. I don't know if you notice that. Like they cover transition, right? They always cover transition. Steady state's kind of boring. There's not a whole lot there. So the transition periods are the ones that are most unique, provide the most insight, and are the most interesting to read.
Right.
And so we are in a transitional period. And that's why I think history books are going to cover this. They're going to go, look, so this is what it was beforehand, and this is what it is today. In 30 years, crypto will be the today. And so the history books are covering fiat.
For sure.
They're covering that conversion when we went from fiat to crypto. They won't be covering all of the years of fiat necessarily. They'll summarize, because it's funny, because the history books stay about the same size when you go to school. It's like about the same size. But history is accumulating. So what are you doing? You're just throwing out stuff to cover, because you only cover so much, right? You're not like going to school for longer periods of time to cover this more history that exists. You're just simply throwing stuff out. Well, that's where crypto comes in. Is like, okay, this is a transitionary period. We're going to cover this in more detail. It's more recent. It's more relevant.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll throw out, some aspects of when checks were invented, in financial history. But that's why I think this is going to go in history books, is because this transition is one of the bigger fundamental shifts in financial history and financial technology. And every transition has been what I call an advancement in technology. So many people won't like to hear this in the crypto space, but I thought that when we went from gold to banks, that was a technology advancement, right? That sounds terrible from the viewpoint of like freedom and freedom of the banks, but it was an advancement because technology makes things more efficient. It makes things that were more expensive and more energy dense much more efficient. And for me to be able to carry the equivalent of 3 pounds of gold in a piece of paper that I can bring to someone else and buy, whatever good, that is an efficiency gain. So hence it's a technology gain. It came at a cost. All of these efficiency gains come at a cost. Like our cell phones come at a cost in humanity. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole to talk about. And so this is another one of those, efficiency gains that crypto is doing to kind of the legacy system. We'll see what those costs end up being over time. The unforeseen, costs of like social media, for this will be the unforeseen costs of cryptocurrency. But they definitely make the history books. I finally think this is a net positive to humanity. So it's definitely one of the historical moments that I'd like to be a part of versus, oh, great, that was the Second World War. Well, not part of the history books I want to be a part of. So hence what's driving a lot of the work and effort that we put into this space.
Wow. A lot of people that will question it. And at a certain point, you don't really need to, we talked about this in the beginning, just making things easy to use. It just has to be so good, people just use it because that's what they use. You don't have to have a philosophical debate. It doesn't matter so much. But also, nothing's all good or all bad. I mean, Amazon.com, it's made my life a lot better. And I think a lot of people's lives a lot better. Obviously, for bookstores. And I do, at the same time, I do appreciate going into a bookstore. But overall, as an aggregate, that's made it worse for, physical bookstores. I think we can agree to that.
Right. It's made it worse for physical, almost any merchant.
Yeah, that's going to continue, right?
We see just giant shopping malls closing down. Like people just don't go to them. Like they're like, well, why do I bother? I just hit Amazon and that's all I need to do. So there's always a ramification of us as humans optimizing something and making something more efficient. There's always a ramification, and it might be something that we think is good enough in the end, like the trade-off is well enough, or it might be kind of a negative one that we're like, oh man, if we'd foreseen that, we wouldn't have done it. But we do our best. That's all we can do. Do our best and see what happens afterwards.
For sure. We're not looking for perfection as an alternative to fiat. We're just looking for better money.
Yeah.
And very timely, Paul, we're in the midst of, it's about to start in Europe and Asia. It's already November 15th, the Bitcoin Cash hard fork of 2018.
Yeah.
Matt here. Now, what is a hard fork? This is an oversimplification. A lot of hard forks are just protocol upgrades or, updates to software, to think of it that way. But some hard forks result in a split, like the recent Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, meaning that the blockchain split into two. And if you own Bitcoin Cash at the time of the fork, you'll own coins on both blockchains, but they are not compatible with each other going forward from the time of the split. Back to the show. And again, remember, these listeners are non-technical, so I'm going to take a shot here and let you finish it about the freedom part. But, we've moved from fiat, US dollar, to programmable money, right? And so a hard fork, I realize there's different types of hard forks, but just to oversimplify here for the listeners, a hard fork happens on various blockchains. Happened on Ethereum, Bitcoin, became, BTC, Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash. And now with Bitcoin Cash, there's different ideas of the way it should be programmed. Some people want different features. So it's going to split into two different coins. And obviously the media, not just crypto, it paints everything differently. And they're like, well, look at all this infighting. Is it unstable? Can we trust cryptocurrency if there's going to be these forks? Can we do business, et cetera, et cetera? And you have a quote saying forking is freedom. So again, just put an emphasis here because I know it's a challenge to a non-technical crowd. Help assimilate everything I just said.
Yeah. So at the heart of the statement that you'd quoted me on, which is forking is freedom, is that if you think about money historically, we've usually been tied to a money and have not had the freedom of opting out of that money and choosing something else.
Right.
But at the same time, if you think what exactly defines money, money is just defined by at least two people accepting that as a means of trade. Right? That's the bare minimum. If I decide to give you one of my shoes and you give me a bite to eat, that shoe could effectively be treated as money. And it becomes more money, its moneyness increases as more people decide to accept that. Now, it has very low moneyness when I give it to you and no one else will take it. It has high moneyness when you're a sneakerhead and suddenly you could trade that thing around the world for a higher value than you originally got it. Right? So it's this entire gray area, the slope of moneyness. Not that it is or it isn't money. Everything is money to somebody. And so the freedom to be able to choose your own money based on its properties is what kind of forking gives us. So the irony of a lot of people that really hate forks is that if they're in the cryptocurrency space, is that really crypto itself was in many ways the forking from fiat. It's saying like, we're just simply going to exit. We don't agree with your rules. We don't agree with your inflation schedule. We don't agree with who can access the network. And we're just simply going to use something else. Now, with hard forks coming from an existing cryptocurrency, they're the same concepts. Like, I don't agree with the rules. I don't like your inflation. I don't like whatever it is about that money. And we're just going to move over and use something else. Now, granted, there is a fundamentally unique thing about cryptocurrency hard forks that don't exist in the fiat world, is that for the first time, you can carry over the balances from one currency to another. And while the dollar could compete with the euro and the euro compete, with the yen, blah, 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 you can't suddenly say, hey, everyone who has a yen, I'm going to launch a new currency, and you now have one of this new currency. Like in some of my talks, I call it the Paul dollar. Like you now all get one Paul dollar for every, yen you have. And so you're able to get almost like a critical mass of interest in the new network right off the bat. You're able to bootstrap the network that you wouldn't be able to do in the fiat world. So this is a unique offering, and it helps level the playing field of competition between currencies. Because now you don't have to get everyone into your platform. They kind of already are there. They have to choose to exit, which some people will do. Like in the BTC BCH hard fork, like, I think that's a trashy fork. I'm just going to sell it and buy more of BTC or buy more of BCH, right? But that's an extra step they have to do. And as opposed to they have to go buy into your new network, they have to exit the new network. So I don't know how many people, I remember during that hard fork, people had Bitcoin and Airbits, and they're like, I want to get rid of my Bitcoin Cash and sell it right away, right after the fork. It's going to drop to $5. And because it was really inconvenient to deal with the fork and splitting and keys, they held it for some amount of time and actually were grateful. Like, I would have sold it at $5. Now I held it's like $500 worth. And so this is the thing that's unique about this cryptocurrency hard forks. It levels the playing field of competition. And so it makes it much more free for us to choose. However, freedom is inconvenient. By giving us a choice, we're burdened with the choice. And we're burdened with dealing with options that now can't just drive us to a single unified tool. We now have multiple tools. And so the dilemma of Baskin-Robbins and 51 flavors is what's now like 10x worse in cryptocurrency. We have too many flavors and it's hard to differentiate between them. And this is a recurring thing in humanity. When we have too many choices, we get overwhelmed and the UX suffers, the user experience suffers. Just like when you go to a web page with too many buttons, I don't know what to do, guide me. And so cryptocurrency is trying to find that balance between the super simplified, minimalist UI of no choice, you just guided down the path, versus buttons and switches and knobs everywhere and you don't know what to choose. And I think that's common with any new technology. You end up having a whole lot of options, and then the market decides on what it really wants and things just start to consolidate over time. And we're just not there yet.
Love that. Yeah. I think also lack of perspective, this is still the early days and you're working to make freedom easier with the Edge wallet. Mm-hmm. And I believe there was either an update or maybe it started the Edge wallet where you have a SDK. Hey there, Matt again. What is SDK? Well, SDK stands for Software Development Kit, and it's a set of tools and code libraries to build applications. Edge has an SDK. And one of the main features with their SDK for third-party iPhone and Android apps that require a wallet, a Bitcoin wallet, well, it allows you to integrate the Edge wallet into your app for payments and another thing. Think about a shopping cart on a website that has PayPal integration. That's using an SDK. Okay, back to the show. Basically, so other apps can use the Edge wallet. So listeners, this is not the best example, but let's just say I'm in Uber and Uber could have the option. This would be great, I think, for Edge. What if I could use my Bitcoin within Uber so I could pay the Uber driver, but obviously I wouldn't want to have to leave the Uber app and enter Edge. No problem. It would just be inside the app. And so I think that's really cool. I remember seeing that when we covered it. I think we covered it on news.bitcoin.com. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting.
Right.
And I'm going to take a guess here. Mm-hmm. I had the video that I didn't have time to watch, to be honest, before, because the interview is about to start, but the Airbits to Edge, because I go to a lot of Bitcoin events, Paul, and sometimes I speak and they say Bitcoin.com, and there's something called Airbit Club, which is kind of an MLM. Did that have anything to do with you changing your name?
No, not at all. And so
okay,
we were happy to stick with the entire Airbits name regardless of the Airbit Club. Like they didn't copy our logo.
Sure.
They recommended several wallets for Airbit Club. Ironically, Airbits was just one of them. It's like they come at us and several other competing wallets. So I don't know if it was intentional. If it was intentional, they did a really bad job. If they're trying to leverage, us and our brand and our name recognition, they did a really poor job because like everything looked different. However, people did get confused and it was kind of unfortunate. And so I'm sure we lost a little bit of business because of that. Maybe gained some as well because they recommend us. But the name was really motivated by the differentiating factor of Airbits compared to other wallets, which is what we coin as the edge security model, and the way we secure keys at the edges of the network, and we say like at the edges of the network, if you kind of have the central servers in the middle and corporations around them and whatnot. But if you take that network model and you go a little bit further out, then you have maybe the network routers outside of it, then you get your ISP, and then you get your router at home. Well, at the very edge of this network topology is actually you're the person. Like the person is the edge of the network. It's us accessing data on our devices. So that really brought the entire spirit of the company and its name together, is that it's not about edge as in a cliff and it being scary and bleeding edge. No, it's about people. And at the heart, that's what edge is, because we are the edge of the network. And that's the way we secure data. It's like, don't take the data, secure it such that you're trusting a central party, secure it at the edges where people have control of it. And when we went to launch a new app that was multi-asset using our SDK, we had to give it a name. We called it Edge Wallet. Our SDK was already called kind of the Edge SDK, Edge Security SDK. And we had Edge Login, which is the single sign-on you were talking about. At that point, it didn't even make sense to retain the Airbit's name anymore, because all the new cool stuff was Edge branded. So we just rebranded the whole company as well.
And so that name Edge, I know you mentioned the SDK, but was that your idea while you're rock climbing? Where did this idea come? Like, where did it happen?
It was actually in conversation. The first usage of the term was as an SDK, it was the Edge SDK. And it actually came from talking to an IoT guy. And he said, hey, I need Edge security for my IoT devices. And what we built doesn't really apply so much in that industry, but the name rang, it resonated with us, this idea of edge security, securing data at the edges, on the edge networks, on the edge devices. And we're like, hey, that's kind of what we do. That has a nice ring to it, and the marketing and the flow and the pitch, it rolled off the tongue really, really well. And so that's when kind of the Edge Security SDK came out, and that's when Edge Login, single sign-on with client-side encrypted data, client edge secured data via single sign-on, that came about. And then of course Edge Wallet, came out, and then there goes the whole company. So yeah, made the full transition now. That's all we're known on is Edge. And Airbit's Wallet still exists because it's a client-side app, and we can't stop it from accessing the network, right? It's just going from your phone directly to the Bitcoin network. It'll continue to work, but we will stop updating it. So as new things happen, new protocol changes happen, upgrades, it'll slowly probably not be the best solution for people to be using, but we're saying, hey, just put your account in Edge and you're good to go.
Very cool, man. Well, Paul, this was a pleasure. You're very insightful, and I don't want to say they're contrarian viewpoints in the sense that they're like remarkably different. It's just you see things in a different way. So maybe I am saying contrarian. I don't know. We talked about language throughout the episode and how it's important to question the words you're saying. Store of value, sound money. Sound money is probably the best one. Like, what is sound money? Does it make a sound when I drop it on the floor? It's noisy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, one last, and I'm going to do this on air, so you're going to feel more pressure to send it to me. You need to take a picture of this really interesting M&M looking, or it was like the yellow Kool-Aid man in a Bitcoin doll with sunglasses. I just want to share that on our episode page.
For those that can't see him, I'll take a little quick selfie of him right there, and then you can see him a little more clearly, and maybe that comes out. There you go. Hopefully that comes out to the viewers right there, so you can see the little M&M guy.
Yeah, so this is actually audio, so I'm going to post it on the page and then the episode page in iTunes. Yeah.
Oh, is it audio? Okay, got it.
But yeah, Paul, thanks so much. It was a pleasure. And yeah, I can't wait to see how things move forward for Edge and the industry as a whole.
Cool. Thanks a lot for having me, and happy to be on the show.
This is Emily Delara, Social Marketing Manager at Bitcoin.com, and you are listening to the Bitcoin.com podcast network. For all things Bitcoin, wallet, mining, news, events, and more, head over to Bitcoin.com. Are you a developer? Start building on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain today. Everything you need to get started at developer.bitcoin.com.